Close your eyes for a second. Imagine you're a child. No food, no water, no bed to sleep in. Just darkness, just silence, just the sound of your own breathing in a house that no longer feels like home. Now, open your eyes. Because for 7 children in Wisconsin, this wasn't just a nightmare. It was their reality. 1 week, 7 kids, locked inside a filthy apartment. No adults, no answers. Just them, abandoned, starving, surrounded by decay. Trapped inside walls that reeked of filth and neglect, waiting for someone, anyone, to realize they were even there. No parents, no teachers, no one checking in. Just them, forgotten, slowly fading into the background of a world that didn't seem to care. And it wasn't until one phone call, one desperate tip, that authorities finally arrived at that door. What they found inside would haunt them forever. Piles of garbage, overflowing toilets, feces and urine soaking into the floors. The air, thick with a stench that made officers gag. And in the middle of it all, 7 children, their faces hollow, their eyes tired, hungry, dirty, alone. This is not just neglect, this is something far, far worse. And today, we uncover the horrifying truth behind the 7 abandoned children of Wisconsin. Welcome to True Crime Stories videos. I welcome you, my viewers, and most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing you daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly regret it. Maybe it's a gas station bathroom off a deserted highway, or that one friend's house where cleaning up means pushing old pizza boxes under the couch. Well, multiply that by 1,000. Then throw in the overwhelming stench of human waste, the eerie silence of abandonment, and 7 pairs of hollow, frightened eyes staring back at you. Congratulations, you've just stepped into apartment 3B on Mifflin Street. It started with a phone call, not from the children, not from their mother, but from a concerned neighbor who had noticed something off, something unsettling. Kids were peeking through the windows. No adult had been seen coming or going for days. The place was eerily quiet, except for the occasional sounds of children crying. Madison Police Department dispatch receives the call. Child Protective Services, CPS, is already on high alert. Whatever's happening inside that apartment, it isn't good. 2 officers respond, heading toward Mifflin Street. Maybe they think it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe they're expecting a stressed-out parent who just ran out for groceries. What they're not expecting, the scene waiting for them behind that door. The first look inside. They knock. Silence. They knock again. Harder this time. Still nothing. Finally, after what feels like forever, the door creaks open. And there it is. A scene straight out of a nightmare. Garbage spilling over, broken toilets, the suffocating stench of human waste, clothes, toys and trash piled in every corner, and in the middle of it all, 7 small, frightened faces staring up at them. The officers take a step inside, and immediately they regret it. One officer instinctively covers his nose, the other, frozen in place, taking it all in. It's not just dirty, it's deplorable. It's the kind of filth that takes time, the kind of neglect that doesn't happen overnight. And yet, for these kids, this was home. The children, ranging from 2 to 13 years old, are dirty, tired, and confused. Some clutch onto one another, others stand motionless, as if unsure whether to run or cry. But the real question here isn't just how they ended up in this situation. It's why. And more importantly, where was their mother? The officers radio for backup. CPS is called in. This is no longer just a welfare check. This is an emergency. But as authorities dig deeper, they realize this story is far from over. Because the biggest mystery isn't just who abandoned these kids. It's what they'd been forced to endure before anyone even noticed. Music intensifies, fade to black. And trust me, what they find next will leave you speechless. There are bad days, and then there are days so horrific, so unthinkable, that they don't just haunt you, they change you. For the officers who walked into apartment 3B that night, this was one of those days. It wasn't just the smell, it wasn't just the filth, it was the silence. 7 children, standing in the middle of what could only be described as a house of horrors, and not one of them made a sound. Who were these kids? Ages ranged from 2 to 13. Think about that for a second. A toddler, a baby barely out of diapers, abandoned in this filth. They had been left alone. For an entire week. No parents, no guardian. Just them. And yet, somehow, they had survived. But how? Who was feeding them? It turns out, a neighbor, a complete stranger, had noticed something was wrong. And every day, they had left food outside the door, hoping someone inside would take it. It was the only reason these kids were still standing when police arrived. Now, let's talk about the apartment itself, if you can even call it that. Imagine walking into a room and feeling your stomach turn before you even see anything. That's how bad the stench was. Garbage, piled so high it practically had its own zip code. Rotting food, scattered across the floor like someone had just given up on life halfway through a meal. And then there was the bathroom. Oh, the bathroom. No working toilets, none. Feces, urine, piling up, spilling over, seeping into the floor. A smell so thick it clung to the walls. It soaked into the air. Everywhere you looked, clothes, toys, blankets, just filthy. It wasn't just neglect. It was abandonment. It was a prison. How were they acting? The younger ones? Silent, too afraid, or maybe too weak to speak. The older ones? They had stepped up. They had taken on the role of caregivers, children, raising children. They had been changing diapers, wiping tears, feeding the little ones with whatever scraps they could find. It was survival mode, a version of childhood no one should ever have to experience. But here's the part that gets worse, because as police took in the nightmare surrounding them, one question kept gnawing at them. Where was their mother? And why did she leave them like this? Authorities had a lead, but what they were about to uncover would only make this nightmare darker. 7 children, alone, filthy, starving. And the biggest question on everyone's mind, where the hell was their mother? It wasn't like she had stepped out for groceries and forgot to come back. No, this was different. This was something worse. Because as police dug into the situation, they discovered something that made the whole case even more disturbing. So, let's talk about the mother, because at this point, authorities sure were. The second those officers stepped into that horrific apartment, their first move was to track down who was supposed to be taking care of these kids. Was she injured? Was she missing? Was she, God forbid, lying in a ditch somewhere? No. She was in Illinois, living her life, as if none of this was happening. For at least a week, while her children sat in filth, surviving off neighborly charity, she was states away. Let that sink in. When authorities finally got in touch with her, she didn't sound panicked. She didn't sound distressed. She agreed to return to Wisconsin, but here's where things get weird. No immediate arrests, no handcuffs, just a conversation. Because police needed answers, and for some reason they weren't getting them right away. And that led to the next big question. The big question, was this neglect or something more? Now let's be clear, there's neglect, and then there's this. Leaving 7 children in an unlivable apartment for days? That's not just bad parenting, that's something else entirely. The burning question, why? Why did she leave? What was so important in Illinois that she thought her kids could fend for themselves? Was this a tragic case of desperation? A mother who truly believed she had no other option? Or was this intentional? Did she walk away, knowing full well what she was leaving behind? Authorities remained tight-lipped. They had theories, they had suspicions, but they weren't saying anything just yet. Because behind the scenes, they were uncovering a lot more than just bad parenting. And trust me, this story is far from over. 7 children rescued from filth, hunger, and complete abandonment. A mother, states away, carrying on as if she hadn't just left her kids in a literal dumpster fire of a home. And now, the big question: what happens next? Because while the kids were finally safe, the story was just getting started. The moment authorities stepped into that nightmare of an apartment, one thing was certain: those kids weren't staying there a second longer. Child Protective Services swooped in immediately. No waiting, no second chances. The children were removed and placed with a family friend, someone who could actually provide food, shelter, and, basic human decency. But the damage had already been done. These weren't just kids who had been neglected for a few days. This was years of filth, starvation, and isolation. The kind of trauma that doesn't just wash off in a bubble bath. Some of the older kids spoke in hushed voices, hesitant to say too much. Others barely spoke at all. And the youngest, a toddler who had never known a world outside of those filthy walls. Let that sink in for a second. This child's entire reality had been one of hunger, darkness, and survival. How do you even begin to undo that kind of damage? Now, while CPS was working on keeping the kids safe, law enforcement had an even bigger problem on their hands. What do you do with a mother who, by all logic, should have been arrested on the spot? Because, believe it or not, when she came back to Wisconsin, they didn't throw her in handcuffs. No flashing lights, no mugshots, just questions. Police wanted to know exactly why she left, exactly what was going on in her mind when she abandoned her own children. But here's where things get frustrating. No arrests, no charges, not yet. And the public? Oh, they were not happy. The moment this story hit the news, it exploded. Social media lit up like a Christmas tree, except instead of holiday cheer, it was a whole lot of rage. People were demanding justice, asking why this woman was walking free when her kids had been suffering for years. Twitter threads, Facebook posts, TikTok videos, everyone had an opinion. Some were furious, saying she needed to be locked up immediately. Others, well, they weren't so sure. Because the other side of the debate was this: was she truly an unfit mother, or was she a mother in crisis? Did she abandon her kids out of malice, or was she desperate and out of options? And that was the question the investigation was now trying to answer. Because as investigators dug deeper, they realized something. This case was about more than just neglect. There were layers to this story, layers that no one saw coming. And when those layers were peeled back, the truth was even darker than anyone imagined. We know the what, we know the where, we even know the who. But the why, the how, that's where things get messy. Because as shocking as this case already is, it leaves behind a trail of disturbing questions. Questions that don't have easy answers. Questions that, quite frankly, should never have to be asked in the first place. How long had this been going on? February 28th. When the police first stepped into that apartment, the horror was fresh. The kids were still there, still trapped in it. But was that really the first time they had been left alone? Spoiler alert, probably not. Investigators started digging, and the deeper they went, the worse it got. There were signs that this wasn't some isolated case of abandonment. This had been building for years. Teachers noticed something was off. Neighbors had concerns. CPS? Well, let's just say this wasn't their first rodeo. CPS, the agency that's supposed to step in before things reach nightmare status. So, had anyone actually reported this mother before? The answer: yes. But, and here's the part that'll make you want to scream into a pillow, nothing happened. At least, nothing big enough to prevent this disaster. Reports had been made, concerns had been raised, but for some reason, it all slipped through the cracks. Which raises another question. How many chances do we get before a child's suffering is considered urgent? Apparently, more than one. Let's talk about those neighbors. Some of them had noticed the kids were alone for days at a time. Some had even tried to help. There was the neighbor who left food outside their door. The one who reported the strange smell. The one who swore they hadn't seen an adult go in or out for weeks. So, if people were noticing, why did it take so long for real action? That's the million-dollar question. Because the reality is, unless there's clear, undeniable evidence of abuse or neglect, authorities can be slow to intervene. And slow, in cases like this, can mean deadly. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the mother. She's back in Wisconsin. She's been questioned, but she's still walking free. So, what's going on? Well, the police, they're tight-lipped. No confirmation on whether she'll be charged. No statement on what they're waiting for. Just silence. Which leaves the public screaming for justice. Because if she is charged, she could be facing serious consequences, child endangerment, neglect, even abandonment charges. But if she isn't? What does that say about child protection laws? If leaving 7 kids alone in filth for days isn't enough for 7 children left to fend for themselves, a mother missing in action, and a system that failed at every single turn, the biggest unanswered questions? They aren't just about this one case. They're about all the cases just like it, the ones that slip through the cracks, the ones we never hear about. And maybe the scariest question of all, how many more are out there? 7 children, alone in filth, a week of fear, a mother gone without a trace. And here we are, no arrests, no answers, just more questions than we started with. Welcome to the modern justice system, where apparently it takes a committee, a lunar eclipse, and divine intervention to decide whether a mother abandoning her kids is a crime. Let's be real for a second. This story is disturbing, but it's also not unique. Every day, children are neglected. Every day, CPS either steps in too late or doesn't step in at all. Every day, stories like this slip through the cracks. And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. This isn't just a one-time horror story. This is happening right now, somewhere else. The question is, are we paying attention? Now, I want to hear from you. Was this just neglect, or something more sinister? Was this a case of a mother in crisis, or a mother who simply didn't care? And what should happen next? Should she be charged? Should CPS be held accountable? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't just a discussion, it's a conversation that needs to happen. If this story made your blood boil, if it made you rethink how child protection works, share it. Spread awareness, because the more people know, the harder it is for cases like this to be ignored. And more importantly, if you ever suspect child abuse, don't wait. Report it. One phone call could save a life. And if you love true crime, the dark, the twisted, the stories that need to be told, then you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications, because we bring you the darkest stories so that you can stay safe out there.